The black limousine glided through the illuminated streets of São Paulo, cutting through the night like a silent shadow. In the back seat, Henry Tavares watched the city through the tinted glass, the reflection of his own face superimposed on the lights of the buildings. At 48, he had built a culinary empire that spanned 12 Brazilian states. The Palazzo d'Oro chain was synonymous with refinement, elegance, and excellence. Every restaurant carried his signature, his vision that true hospitality transcended the luxury of silver cutlery and crystal chandeliers. But something had changed. Henry felt it like an unhealing wound, a suspicion that grew with every report analyzed, every whispered conversation that reached his ears. Success, so hard won, seemed to have brought a subtle poison with it. His employees, especially those in leadership positions, had transformed. Arrogance had replaced humility. Prejudice disguised as exclusivity had become a shadow over the essence of what he had always championed. Henry closed his eyes, recalling his own beginnings. The son of a cook and a waiter, he had grown up behind the scenes of small restaurants in Belo Horizonte. He knew the smell of sautéed garlic before he even learned to walk. He watched his mother come home with swollen feet, but always with a smile as she served the simple family dinner. It was from her that he learned the most important lesson. Respect is not bought with money, but offered freely to every human being. The limousine stopped in front of an imposing mansion in Jardim Europa. Henry stepped out of the car and walked across the perfectly manicured lawn to the front door. Inside, his daughter Haley was waiting for him in the living room, flipping through a fairy tale book. The 10-year-old girl looked up with her brown eyes when her father entered, and her face lit up with a spontaneous smile. Haley was the reason Henry still believed in genuine goodness. Even surrounded by privilege, the girl maintained a purity that moved him. She treated the housekeeper with the same affection she showed her private school friends. She shared her toys without hesitation. Her heart had not yet been corrupted by the illusion of superiority that money often brings. Henry sat down next to his daughter, feeling the weight of the decision he had made days ago. It was an audacious plan, perhaps even cruel in the eyes of some, but necessary. He needed to know the truth. He needed to confirm whether his suspicions were founded or if his mind was creating non-existent ghosts. "Haley, I need to talk to you about something important," he said, choosing his words carefully. The girl closed the book and turned completely toward her father, demonstrating the total attention that only children can offer. "Go ahead, Dad." Henry took a deep breath. "Do you remember when we talked about empathy, about how important it is to understand what other people feel?" Haley nodded. "You said it's like putting on someone else's shoes and walking around for a little bit." "Exactly. And today I'd like to propose something different for you. A kind of experiment. A test that can teach us a lot about people and about ourselves." Curiosity sparkled in the girl's eyes. "What kind of test?" Henry hesitated for a moment. "I want you to visit one of our restaurants, but not as Haley Tavares, the owner's daughter. I want you to go in dressed very differently, looking like a child who doesn't have a home, who lives on the streets." Haley's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of confusion. "Why, Dad?" "Because I need to know if the people who work for me still remember the values we built together. I want to see how they treat someone who appears to have nothing, no power, no influence. Do you understand?" Haley processed the information in silence. At 10, she already showed surprising maturity, perhaps a legacy of the deep conversations she always had with her father. "But you'll be there, right? I won't really be alone. I will be watching every second through the security cameras. And if at any point you want to stop, just give us the signal." "We agreed on, and I'll appear immediately. You are safe always." The girl bit her lower lip, thoughtful. "What if people are mean to me?" Henry held his daughter's small hand in his. "That is exactly the answer I'm looking for, my dear. If they are mean, I will need to make important changes. But there is also the possibility that they are kind, and that will bring me peace of mind. Either way, you would help me a lot with this." Haley remained silent for long seconds. Henry could see the internal battle reflected on her face. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it, Dad. But promise me one thing. Anything. Promise me that if we find out people are bad, you won't just fire them. Promise me you'll try to teach them to be better." Henry's heart tightened. How could this child be so wise? "I promise, Haley. I will do everything in my power." 3 days later, Henry was in his private office, a spacious room on the top floor of the Palazzo d'Oro corporate building. Before him, on the mahogany desk, was a carefully selected set of clothes: torn pants, a faded and stained t-shirt, a worn-out jacket. Beside them, theatrical makeup products that would simulate dirt on Haley's skin. The door opened and Haley entered, accompanied by her mother, Beatrice. The woman's eyes were red, clearly unhappy with her husband's plan, but respecting the family decision. "Henry, I still think this is too risky," Beatrice said, her voice tense. "I know, my love, but I will take every precaution. Marcia will be with me in the monitoring room. We will have plainclothes security strategically positioned. Haley will not be in any real danger." Beatrice sighed and looked at her daughter. "Are you sure about this, sweetie?" Haley nodded firmly. "I want to help Dad." The transformation took almost an hour. When they finished, Haley barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her well-combed hair was now deliberately messy and dirty. Her face, normally clean and rosy, was smeared with products that mimicked dirt and soot. The baggy, torn clothes completed the illusion of abandonment. Henry felt a pang in his chest seeing his daughter like that. Part of him wanted to cancel everything, hug her, and take her home. But the other part, the one seeking the truth at any cost, kept him firm in his decision. The chosen restaurant was the Faria Lima Avenue unit, one of the most prestigious in the entire chain. Located in a mirrored glass building, Palazzo d'Oro Faria Lima catered to the São Paulo business elite. Executives, entrepreneurs, politicians, and artists frequented the location, drawn both by the impeccable cuisine and the status the address conferred. Henry arrived 2 hours before Haley, accompanied by Marcia, his trusted assistant of 15 years. Together, they settled into the restaurant's monitoring room, a small space in the back of the establishment where all security cameras could be accessed simultaneously. Marcia adjusted the monitors, zooming in on the images from the strategic cameras. The main entrance, the dining hall, the reception desk. Everything was under surveillance. "Mr. Tavares, there is still time to reconsider," Marcia murmured, worry evident in her voice. Henry shook his head. "I have to do this, Marcia. For Haley. For everyone who comes after her. If my company has become a place where cruelty is tolerated, then I built everything on sand." At exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, the discreet car transporting Haley stopped 2 blocks from the restaurant. The girl got out alone, as agreed, and began walking down the sidewalk. Henry followed her through the external camera, his heart racing faster than it ever had in his entire business life. Haley reached the restaurant door and stopped. Even through the grainy camera image, Henry could see the hesitation in her small shoulders. Then, with a courage that filled him with simultaneous pride and fear, she pushed the glass door and entered. The interior of Palazzo d'Oro Faria Lima was a design masterpiece. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, reflecting golden light onto tables covered with immaculate white linen tablecloths. The marble floor shone like a mirror. In the air, the subtle aroma of fine spices and expensive wines. Haley took 3 steps inside and stopped again. Henry saw, through the cameras, the exact moment her presence was noticed. A woman in a designer dress, sitting at the table closest to the entrance, turned her head, and her expression instantly transformed from indifference to revulsion. The woman nudged her husband and whispered something. The man looked at Haley and frowned. In seconds, a wave of glances followed in the girl's direction. Customers who had been talking animatedly were now whispering among themselves, pointing discreetly. Henry clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain seated. On the monitor, Haley advanced toward the reception desk, where a young man in an impeccable uniform was organizing the reservation list. The young man, Bruno was his name according to the tag he wore, looked up when Haley approached. The transformation in Bruno's expression was immediate and shocking. The professional smile vanished, replaced by a mask of poorly disguised disdain. "Can I help you?" Bruno asked, his tone loaded with implicit sarcasm. Haley lifted her chin, exactly as Henry had taught her. "I want a table, please." Bruno let out a short laugh. Table? Here?" Haley nodded affirmatively. "I have money to pay." The receptionist looked around, as if seeking confirmation that this was a bad joke. "Look, little girl, I think you've got the wrong place. This isn't a shelter, it's a real restaurant." The words hit Henry like knives. He saw Haley blink quickly, holding back tears, but maintaining her upright posture. "I know where I am," she replied, her voice firm, despite the noticeable tremor. It was then that a figure emerged from the administrative area. Rodrigo Mendez, the Faria Lima unit manager, approached the counter with firm steps. Henry knew him well, or thought he did. Rodrigo had worked for the chain for 8 years, quickly climbing the hierarchy. He had always been polite in meetings, efficient with numbers, impeccable in appearance. But now, watching through the camera, Henry was about to discover who Rodrigo really was when no one important was looking. And the revelation would be more bitter than anything he could have imagined. Rodrigo Mendez arrived at the counter with the posture of someone about to solve an annoying problem. His eyes scanned Haley from head to toe, and the corner of his mouth curled into a smile that was nowhere near cordial. It was the kind of smile that precedes a calculated humiliation. "What's the problem here, Bruno?" Rodrigo asked, although his eyes remained fixed on Haley. Bruno, the receptionist, seemed relieved by his superior's arrival. "This girl wants a table, Mr. Mendez. She said she has money." Rodrigo crossed his arms over his chest, leaning slightly forward. "Is that so? And how much money would that be, little one?" Haley reached into the pocket of her worn jacket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. They were real bills, money Henry had given her, to make the test more convincing. "Enough for a meal." Rodrigo looked at the money with theatrical disdain. Then he turned to Bruno, and the two exchanged a knowing look, as if sharing a private joke. In the monitoring room, Henry felt anger begin to boil in his veins. Marcia, beside him, was visibly tense, her hands clasped in her lap. "Mr. Tavares, maybe it's time to intervene," she suggested softly. "Not yet," Henry replied, his voice hoarse. "I need to see how far this goes." In the dining hall, Rodrigo had made a decision. "Very well, let's do this. You want a table? I'll give you a table, but it will have to be that one, in the back." He pointed to the most isolated corner of the restaurant, an area near the restrooms where customers rarely sat. It was the kind of location reserved for emergency situations, when the restaurant was packed and there was no other option. Even then, they offered a discount for the inconvenience. Haley looked in the indicated direction and then back at Rodrigo. "That's fine. That spot will do." The answer surprised the manager for a brief moment, but he quickly regained his arrogant composure. "Right. Follow me." Rodrigo led Haley through the main hall, and the walk to the back table turned into a corridor of silent judgments. Customers stopped eating to watch the girl pass. Some averted their eyes with contempt, others whispered among themselves, without any discretion. One woman held her designer purse closer to her body, as if Haley represented a threat. Henry followed every second through the multiple cameras, switching between angles to not miss any detail. Every look of repugnance, every malicious comment murmured, every gesture of rejection was hammered into his consciousness like burning nails. Haley reached the table and sat down in the chair that Rodrigo pulled out with an exaggeratedly courteous, almost mocking gesture. The table was, in fact, next to the restroom door. The smell of cleaning products mixed unpleasantly with the aromas of the kitchen. Rodrigo extended the menu, but when Haley reached out to take it, he held it for a second longer, forcing her to pull slightly. "Our menu is quite sophisticated. Are you sure you'll understand it?" Haley opened the menu without answering. Her eyes scanned the options, and Henry, who knew his daughter, knew she was memorizing every word, every price. Finally, she pointed to a simple dish, a fungi risotto. "I want this one, please." Rodrigo wrote it down on a small pad. Drink? Water is fine. Excellent choice, Rodrigo said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. I will personally ensure you receive special attention. He walked away, and Henry saw through the camera the moment the manager entered the kitchen. The angle of the camera installed in the prep area allowed him to see Rodrigo talking to the executive chef, Marcelo, a 50-year-old man who had worked for the chain for 6 years. Henry couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language said a lot. Rodrigo gesticulated animatedly, pointing in the direction of the dining hall. Marcelo frowned, looking hesitant. Rodrigo insisted, hitting his hand on the stainless steel counter. Finally, Marcelo nodded affirmatively, although his expression remained troubled. "What are they planning?" Marcia murmured, vocalizing exactly the thought that dominated Henry's mind. The answer was not long in coming. Rodrigo left the kitchen and walked to a back pantry. The camera there showed shelves organized with various ingredients. Rodrigo rummaged until he found what he was looking for, a container of mushrooms that had clearly passed their expiration date. The edges were darkened, and even through the grainy camera image, suspicious spots were visible. Henry abruptly stood up from his chair. "That bastard isn't going to..." But Rodrigo did exactly that. He returned to the kitchen carrying the container of spoiled mushrooms and handed it to Marcelo. The chef looked at the ingredients, then at Rodrigo, and something in his expression changed. It was disgust mixed with fear. Marcelo began shaking his head, refusing. Rodrigo moved closer, his face inches from the chef's, clearly uttering some kind of threat. The tension in the kitchen was palpable, even through the screen. It was then that another figure entered the scene. A young woman wearing the simple waitress uniform approached carrying an empty tray. She was about 25, with black hair pulled back in a ponytail and an expression that mixed tiredness and determination. "Who is she?" Henry asked Marcia. The assistant quickly consulted a list on her tablet. "Carla Noguera. She's been working here for 3 months, hired as a waitress." In the kitchen, Carla had stopped when she noticed the argument between Rodrigo and Marcelo. Henry saw the exact moment she looked at the spoiled mushrooms in the chef's hands and understood what was happening. Her eyes widened, first in shock, then in horror. Rodrigo noticed Carla's presence and turned abruptly. He said something to her, probably an order to step away. Carla remained standing for a few more seconds, looking from the manager to the mushrooms and back. Then slowly, she backed away and left the kitchen. Henry followed Carla through the dining hall cameras. The waitress walked to the service area, where she put down the tray and stood still, clearly in internal conflict. Her hands trembled slightly as she leaned on the counter. Back in the kitchen, Marcelo had given in. With reluctant and tense movements, he began preparing the risotto using the contaminated ingredients. Every gesture seemed painful, as if he were betraying something fundamental within himself. And he was. Henry watched the scene with a mixture of fury and desolation. Rodrigo remained there, supervising the preparation like a cruel overseer, ensuring his orders were carried out exactly as planned. The dish was ready in 20 minutes. Marcelo placed the risotto on a porcelain plate but refused to add the final touches of presentation that would normally adorn the meal. It was his small form of protest, of not lending his culinary art to that atrocity. Rodrigo took the plate and left the kitchen toward the dining hall. But before he could take 3 steps, Carla appeared in front of him. "I'll take it, Mr. Mendez," she said, extending her hands to receive the plate. Rodrigo looked at her suspiciously. "It's not necessary, Carla. I can deliver it personally." "I insist," she replied, her voice firm. "It's my job." There was a moment of tension, a duel of wills fought through glances. Finally, Rodrigo handed the plate to Carla, but not before leaning in and whispering something in her ear. Henry saw Carla pale slightly, but she nodded affirmatively and headed toward Haley's table. In the monitoring room, Henry was standing, his hands resting on the desk, his eyes fixed on the screens. "Marcia, prepare to call the health department and our lawyers. This ends now." But Marcia gently held his arm. "Mr. Tavares, wait. Look." Henry followed Marcia's finger pointing to one of the screens. Carla had stopped on the way between the kitchen and Haley's table. She looked around, making sure no one was watching, and then did something unexpected. She pulled a small notepad from her apron pocket, scribbled something quickly, and folded the paper into a tiny square. Carla resumed her path to Haley's table. When she arrived, she placed the plate in front of the girl with a gentle smile, so different from all the looks Haley had received since entering the restaurant. "Your fungi risotto," Carla said aloud, and then, in a quick, discreet movement, she slid the folded piece of paper under the edge of the plate, ensuring it was hidden but accessible. Haley looked at the plate, then at Carla. The waitress held the girl's gaze for a second longer than would be natural, as if trying to convey a silent message. Then she walked away. Henry saw Haley hesitate, looking at the steaming food. Slowly, she reached out, not to pick up the fork, but to touch the edge of the plate. Her fingers found the folded paper, and with a subtle movement, she pulled it into her lap. The girl opened the paper under the table, away from curious eyes. Henry adjusted the camera zoom, desperately trying to see what was written, but the angle didn't allow it. In the dining hall, Haley read the message. Henry saw the transformation on her face, her eyes widening, the color draining from her cheeks. The girl looked at the plate of risotto, then at the kitchen area where Carla had disappeared, and then directly at the nearest security camera. It was a quick, almost imperceptible glance, but Henry caught it. It was the signal. Haley was asking for help. Henry was moving before he even finished the thought. "Let's go," he said to Marcia, his voice transformed into a military command. "Call security. Activate all protocols. I want this place sealed in 5 minutes." As Henry left the monitoring room, one last image was etched in his mind. Haley sitting alone at that humiliating table, surrounded by the luxury he had built, holding a warning note from a stranger who had risked everything to do what was right. Henry crossed the administrative corridor with steps that echoed like contained thunder. Behind him, Marcia followed, speaking rapidly on the phone, mobilizing the legal and security team. The fury burning in Henry's chest was tempered by something deeper, a sharp pain from the confirmation that his company, his legacy, had become exactly the kind of place he swore never to create. But along with the anger and disappointment, an unexpected feeling of gratitude also grew. Carla Noguera, a waitress who had worked there for only 3 months, earning a modest salary, had chosen integrity over job security. She saw a child in danger and acted, knowing full well it could cost her everything. Henry stopped before entering the main dining hall. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to regain his composure. He couldn't just explode there. There was a right way to do things, a way that would not only punish the guilty, but also send a clear message to all employees in the chain. Marcia approached, putting away her phone. "Everything is ready, Mr. Tavares. Security is on the way. Attorney Felipe is en route, should arrive in 15 minutes, and I've already contacted the Human Resources Directorate. Good. Now let's go get my daughter." Henry pushed open the door leading to the dining hall and entered. Immediately, several customers looked in his direction. Some recognized him. After all, his face occasionally appeared in business magazines and social events. He saw the whispers spread like ripples. He walked directly to the table in the back where Haley remained seated, the untouched plate of risotto before her, the small note now hidden in her pocket. When the girl saw him, her eyes filled with contained tears, but she maintained her upright posture, exactly as he had taught her. Henry reached the table and, to the surprise of everyone watching, pulled up a chair next to Haley and sat down. "Hi, my love," he said softly, placing his hand over hers. "Hi, Dad," Haley replied, her voice trembling. It was then that Rodrigo Mendez emerged from the kitchen and, upon seeing Henry Tavares sitting at the street child's table, froze in the middle of the dining hall. The manager blinked several times as if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then an expression of panic began to form on his face. Henry watched Rodrigo approach with an icy gaze. The manager tried to regain his composure, forcing a professional smile. "Mr. Tavares, what a wonderful surprise," Rodrigo said, his voice slightly failing. We didn't know you would honor us with your presence today. If we had been notified, we would have prepared. Prepared what, Rodrigo? Henry interrupted, his voice low but charged with authority. A worthy reception? Respectful treatment? Shouldn't that be the case for all customers? Rodrigo swallowed hard. Of course, sir. We always treat everyone with a lie. Henry cut him off again. He picked up the plate of risotto and pushed it toward the manager. Sit down, Rodrigo. Sir? I said sit down, now. Rodrigo obeyed, his hands visibly shaking as he pulled up a chair. The movement did not go unnoticed by nearby customers, and now practically the entire restaurant was watching the scene with growing curiosity. This dish, Henry continued, was specially prepared for this child. You personally supervised its preparation, didn't you? Yes, sir. I wanted to ensure quality, Rodrigo stammered. Quality. Henry repeated the word as if savoring poison. Then explain to me why you instructed Chef Marcelo to use expired, potentially dangerous ingredients in this risotto. Rodrigo's face transformed into a mask of horror. Mr. Tavares, I don't know what you're talking about. There must be some mistake. Henry pulled his phone from his pocket and with a few taps accessed the security camera system. He turned the screen toward Rodrigo, showing the recording from the pantry. There was the manager, clear as day, picking up the container of spoiled mushrooms. Still denying it? Rodrigo opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water. Around them, the customers' murmurs turned into audible exclamations of shock and revulsion. Mr. Tavares, I can explain. The child, she shouldn't have been here. She was disturbing customers, lowering the establishment's standards. I just wanted to teach a lesson about what? About social hierarchy? About your power to judge who deserves dignity and who doesn't? Henry stood up, his presence seeming to fill the entire space. This child you tried to poison is my daughter, Haley Tavares. The silence that followed was absolute. Rodrigo paled until his lips were colorless. Around the dining hall, customers rose from their chairs, some with their hands covering their mouths in shock, others grabbing their phones to record the moment. Your daughter? Rodrigo repeated, his voice coming out as a strangled whisper. My daughter, Henry confirmed. And every person who works in this restaurant, every customer who crosses that door, deserves the same respect you should have offered her. But instead, you chose cruelty. Worse, you chose the path of deliberately harmful action. Marcia approached, accompanied by 2 discreetly dressed security guards. Mr. Tavares, the authorities have been notified. We have health department representatives on the way. Rodrigo stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. Mr. Tavares, please, it was a lapse in judgment. If I had known it was your daughter. And there is the crux of the matter, Rodrigo, Henry said, his voice cutting. The problem is not that you didn't know who she was. The problem is that it would matter to you. Every human being who enters this establishment deserves respect, not because they might be rich or influential, but simply because they are human. Henry turned to the dining hall, his voice projecting so everyone could hear. To all present, I apologize. I apologize because this place, which should represent excellence in hospitality, became a space for discrimination and danger. From this moment on, Palazzo d'Oro Faria Lima is temporarily closed for a complete reformulation of values and staff. A murmur ran through the hall. Some customers seemed indignant, others understanding. An elderly lady approached timidly. Mr. Tavares, she said, her voice soft but firm. I am Mrs. Cecilia Andrade. I have been coming to this restaurant for 3 years, and I must confess that I always noticed a certain discomfort in the way some employees treated people they considered inferior. It wasn't just the homeless or vulnerable people. It was waiters, delivery drivers, anyone who didn't wear expensive clothes. I'm glad you are taking action. Henry nodded respectfully. Thank you for your honesty, Mrs. Andrade. It is exactly this behavior that needs to be eradicated. It was then that Carla Noguera emerged from the service area. She stopped at a safe distance, but her gaze was fixed on Haley, clearly checking if the girl was okay. Henry saw the waitress and felt his heart tighten. "Carla," he called. "Please, come closer." The young woman hesitated, then walked slowly to where Henry was. Her eyes were wide, clearly expecting the worst. After all, she had interfered with the orders of her direct superior. "Mr. Tavares, she began. But Henry gently raised his hand. "You saved my daughter, Carla. You saw a child in danger and acted, even knowing it could cost you your job. Why?" Carla looked at Haley, then back at Henry. "Because it was the right thing to do, sir. I grew up in a difficult situation. My mother raised me and my two brothers alone, working as a housekeeper. I know what it's like to be treated as if you're worth less because of the clothes you wear or the address where you live. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen to someone else, especially a child." Henry extended his hand. "Carla, as of today, you are no longer a waitress. I want you to work directly with me on reformulating our service protocols and team training. You will be a consultant for true hospitality, because you clearly understand what that means, better than many in leadership positions." Carla looked at the extended hand as if it were an object from another world. "Sir, I don't have the background for that. I only finished high school." "The best education comes from empathy and moral courage," Henry replied, "and you have demonstrated an abundance of both. What do you say?" Tears began to stream down Carla's face as she shook Henry's hand. "I accept. I will do my best." Marcia approached again, this time accompanied by a man in a health department uniform and two police officers. "Mr. Tavares, the authorities need to take statements and examine the kitchen." Henry nodded affirmatively. "Rodrigo, you will remain here and cooperate fully with the investigation. Marcia, ensure that all security footage is preserved and handed over to the authorities." Rodrigo was sitting again, his head in his hands. The man who an hour ago flaunted power and arrogance now looked small and defeated. The officers took Rodrigo to a private room for an initial statement. The health department representative, accompanied by Marcelo, the chef who was still in the kitchen, began inspecting the facilities. The restaurant quickly emptied, customers being gently escorted to the exit with formal apologies and vouchers for future dinners. Henry finally had a moment alone with Haley. He knelt before his daughter and took her hands in his. "You were incredibly brave today," he said, his voice choked. "It was horrible, Dad," Haley replied, tears finally flowing freely. "People looked at me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. I know, my dear, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But your courage helped reveal a truth I needed to see. Now I can make the necessary changes." Haley wiped her tears. "Are you going to keep your promise? Are you going to try to teach people to be better?" "I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to ensure that every person who works for me understands that dignity is not a privilege, it is a fundamental right." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity. The story of what happened at Palazzo d'Oro Faria Lima spread like wildfire. Some customers who were present shared accounts on social media, and although Henry did not seek publicity, the narrative took on a life of its own. The humility test, as it was being called, generated heated debates about discrimination, privilege, and social responsibility. Henry settled into his central office, transforming the space into a command center for the complete reformulation of his restaurants. Marcia coordinated endless meetings with regional managers, human resources directors, and specialized consultants in organizational culture. And beside Henry, actively participating in every discussion, was Carla Noguera. The young waitress proved to be a force of nature. Her perspective from the base of the corporate pyramid was invaluable. Carla identified structural problems that no expensive consultant had ever noticed. She spoke about the pressure managers put on the team to maximize tips, creating a culture where well-dressed customers received preferential attention. She mentioned the derogatory comments made behind the scenes about customers considered inappropriate. She revealed the cruel hierarchy that existed even among the employees themselves. On a rainy Thursday morning, Henry called an extraordinary meeting with all the managers of the 12 Palazzo d'Oro units. The conference room was packed, the air thick with anxiety. Everyone knew about Rodrigo Mendez, about the charges he faced, about the temporary closure of the Faria Lima unit. Henry entered accompanied by Carla and Marcia. He sat at the head of the table while the two women took the chairs beside him. The silence was sepulchral. "Thank you for coming," Henry began, his voice calm but charged with authority. "You are all aware of what happened at the Faria Lima unit. What you may not know is the extent of what we have discovered since then." He nodded to Marcia, who projected a presentation onto the screen behind him. They were graphs and statistical data, but what they told was a disturbing story. Ignored complaints about discriminatory treatment, suspicious turnover rates in certain units, anonymous reports from employees about toxic environments. "We conducted a complete internal audit," Henry continued, "and what we found deeply shames me. Rodrigo Mendez was not an exception. He was a symptom of a disease that infected our culture without me realizing it in time." One of the managers, Paul Costa from the Brasilia unit, cleared his throat. "Mr. Tavares, with all due respect, I have worked for this company for 7 years. I have always maintained high service standards. My team is well trained and how do you treat the suppliers who arrive through the service entrance?" Carla interrupted, her voice firm and clear. "How do you treat the cleaning staff? The delivery drivers who pick up orders?" Paul blinked, clearly not expecting to be questioned by someone who, until days ago, held a position he considered inferior. I treat them professionally, of course." Carla pulled out a tablet and scrolled until she found what she was looking for. "I have 3 reports here from employees at your unit. A delivery driver who was told to wait outside in the rain because his presence in the waiting area was bothering customers. A cleaning employee who was reprimanded for using the social elevator to transport hygiene products. A dairy supplier who reported being treated like an intruder whenever he made deliveries." Paul's face flushed. Those are safety and organizational procedures. It has nothing to do with discrimination." "It has everything to do with how we view people," Henry responded, "with who we consider worthy of comfort, of basic respect. And that stops now." He stood up, walking around the table as he spoke. "I will be absolutely clear. We are implementing profound changes across the entire chain. First, all of you will undergo an intensive training program on true hospitality, empathy, and anti-discrimination. It is not optional." A murmur ran through the room. Henry raised his hand, asking for silence. "Second, we are creating anonymous and protected channels for employees to report inappropriate behavior without fear of retaliation. Third, we will implement quarterly evaluations that will include feedback from all levels of the team, not just superiors. We want to know how managers treat those who work under their supervision. And fourth," Henry concluded, returning to his seat, "each unit will now have an ethical hospitality representative. This will be someone from the base team, chosen by their own colleagues, who will have a direct line to me and Carla. This person will be untouchable, cannot be fired or demoted without my personal authorization, and their function will be to ensure that our values are lived, not just proclaimed." The manager of the Salvador unit, Fernanda Rocha, timidly raised her hand. "Mr. Tavares, I understand the need for changes, but won't this create an environment where employees will be afraid to make decisions? Where any action will be questioned?" Carla answered before Henry could. "Fernanda, may I ask a question? If you make a decision based on respect, professionalism, and genuine empathy, why would you be afraid of being questioned?" Fernanda opened her mouth, closed it, and then nodded slowly. "You're right. I wouldn't be." "Exactly," Henry said. "We are not creating an environment of fear, but of responsibility. And yes, some of you may decide that you no longer fit into this new culture. If that is the case, we will assist you in transitioning to other opportunities. But for those who remain, I expect total commitment." The meeting continued for 2 more hours. Henry and Carla presented the new protocols in detail. There would be mandatory monthly training sessions. Undercover surprise audits were secret. Evaluators would visit the restaurants in different situations. Financial incentives linked not only to sales results, but also to satisfaction evaluations from the entire team. When the meeting concluded, some managers left visibly relieved, others clearly disturbed. 3 of them requested private meetings with Henry in the following weeks to discuss voluntary separation. Henry respected these decisions, offering generous severance packages. It was better to lose employees who didn't share the values than to keep those who would sabotage them. Meanwhile, the investigation into Robert Miller revealed even deeper layers of corruption. Chef Marcus, granted immunity in exchange for full testimony, exposed a scheme that had been running for over a year. Robert overcharged for ingredient purchases, pocketing the difference. He allowed inferior suppliers to pay kickbacks to become the unit's sole providers. He diverted expensive wines, replacing them with cheap versions in the original bottles. The magnitude of the betrayal left Henry shaken. He had trusted Robert. He had promoted the man, increased his salary, and considered him one of the company's pillars. And all that time, Robert had been building an empire of dishonesty right under his nose. On an especially difficult afternoon, Henry sat alone in his office, contemplating the city view through the wide windows. Martha entered silently, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You couldn't have known, Mr. Thompson," she said, offering one of the cups. Henry accepted the coffee but didn't drink it. "I should have seen the signs, Martha. I am responsible for every person who works for me. And I failed. You built a successful company from nothing. You employ hundreds of people. You feed thousands every month. One bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch. But it almost poisoned my daughter." Henry finally looked at Martha, his eyes revealing a vulnerability rarely exposed. If Chloe hadn't acted, if Helen had eaten that risotto. But she didn't. Chloe acted. And now you are turning this terrible experience into something that will make the company better, stronger, and more aligned with its true values. Henry nodded, but the guilt still weighed heavily. The following week, he made an unexpected decision. He called an assembly with all employees of the downtown unit, which was still temporarily closed. The restaurant hall was packed with servers, cooks, hosts, cleaning staff, and everyone else who worked there. Henry stepped onto a small makeshift stage, refusing the microphone to speak directly to the people. "I want to apologize to all of you," he began, his voice echoing in the attentive silence. "I apologize because I created an environment where you were pressured to choose between your integrity and your financial security, where some of you witnessed injustices, but were afraid to speak up for fear of retaliation." He paused, observing the faces before him. Some looked confused, others emotional, many just tired. What happened to my daughter was not an isolated incident. It was the result of a culture that allowed power to corrupt. And for that, for letting that culture develop, I am deeply responsible. A line cook up front raised his hand. "Mr. Thompson, many of us knew something was wrong, but we didn't know who to turn to." "That's why we are changing everything," Henry replied. "From now on, you will have a voice. You will have protection. And you will have the guarantee that doing the right thing will never cost you your job." He then announced something that surprised everyone. Every employee at the downtown unit would receive a special bonus, a tangible apology for having worked under Robert's toxic management. Furthermore, those who wished could request a transfer to other units without any penalty. The assembly ended with applause, but Henry knew that words and gestures were only the beginning. The real change would come in the following days, weeks, and months, in the consistent implementation of the new values. 2 months after the incident, the Golden Palace's downtown unit was preparing to reopen. The transformation had been complete, not just structural but philosophical. Henry had invested not only in physical renovations, but in rebuilding the soul of the place. Chloe Nelson had become a central figure in this process. Working directly with Henry and a team of organizational psychologists, she helped develop a revolutionary training program. These weren't just theoretical lectures on hospitality, but practical exercises in empathy. Managers were invited to spend a day working in entry-level positions, kitchen assistants participated in workshops on nonviolent communication, and everyone in the company, regardless of rank, went through sessions where they shared their own experiences of discrimination or prejudice. The initial response was mixed. Some employees embraced the changes with enthusiasm, others resisted with skepticism disguised as pragmatism. But slowly, something began to shift. Stories reached Henry's ears, small victories that signaled a genuine transformation. In the Chicago unit, a manager interrupted a customer who was rudely treating a waitress, politely explaining that disrespectful behavior would not be tolerated in the establishment. The customer, initially indignant, ended up apologizing to the employee. In the Austin unit, the team spontaneously organized a solidarity fund to help a coworker facing unexpected financial difficulties. In the Miami unit, a host received effusive praise from a customer after treating an elderly gentleman with dignity and attention when he arrived at the restaurant visibly disoriented, lost in his own memory. These stories were oxygen for Henry. They proved that his original vision, the one that motivated him to open the first Golden Palace years ago, was still possible. More than that, it was resurfacing. Helen had also been deeply affected by the experience. The girl, who had always been empathetic, developed an even sharper social conscience. She began to question privilege in ways that surprised and challenged Henry. One Sunday morning, during family breakfast, Helen looked at her father seriously. "Dad, why don't we use some of the restaurant profits to create a program that employs people experiencing homelessness?" Henry paused with his cup in the air. "That's an interesting idea, Helen. But that kind of program requires a lot of planning, training. Chloe said that many people living on the streets have incredible skills. They just don't have opportunities," Helen interrupted. "What if we partnered with organizations that already work with that population?" "It wouldn't be that hard." Beatrice, Helen's mother, smiled proudly at her daughter. "She's not wrong, Henry. You always said the Golden Palace should be more than just a business." Henry looked at the two most important women in his life and felt his heart swell. "You are absolutely right. I'll talk to Chloe and Martha tomorrow." And so, Project New Start was born. In partnership with 3 specialized nonprofits, the Golden Palace created a pilot program that offered professional training, psychological support, and real employment opportunities for people in situations of social vulnerability. The program started small, with 5 openings at the central unit in Manhattan, but the plan was to expand. The first person selected for Project New Start was John Paul, a 32-year-old man who had lived on the streets for 3 years after losing his job and family in a devastating sequence of events. John had previous experience as a kitchen assistant and, with adequate training and emotional support, flourished quickly. Henry made a point of personally following John's progress. He visited the kitchen regularly, talked to him about the challenges, and offered encouragement on difficult days. And John, in turn, became a living example of the Golden Palace's renewed philosophy. Everyone deserves dignity and opportunity. Meanwhile, Robert Miller's case proceeded through the legal system. The charges were multiple: fraud, embezzlement, reckless endangerment. Robert's lawyers tried to negotiate plea deals, but Henry stood firm. It wasn't vengeance, he explained to his attorney. It was ensuring there were real consequences for actions that could have caused irreparable harm. The trial was scheduled to happen in 6 months, but the evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, fraudulent financial documents, testimonies from multiple employees. Robert faced years of legal consequences, and Henry felt a mixture of satisfaction for justice and sadness for the waste of human potential. Marcus, the chef who had been coerced into preparing the contaminated risotto, received different treatment. Henry recognized that the man was in an impossible position, pressured by an abusive superior in an environment where challenging orders meant risking his family's livelihood. Marcus received a second chance, transferred to the Dallas unit with the recommendation that he undergo therapeutic counseling to process the guilt he clearly carried. 6 months is enough time to prove yourself again, Henry told the chef in a private meeting. But it is also enough time to reflect on the courage it takes to do the right thing even under pressure. Marcus accepted the opportunity with gratitude mixed with shame, swearing he would never allow intimidation to compromise his integrity again. The night before the downtown unit's grand reopening was marked by a special ceremony. Henry organized an event just for employees, a kind of rededication of the space. The restaurant was beautifully decorated, but in a way different from the usual ostentatious luxury. There were photographs on the walls showing the team in moments of work and celebration. Quotes about empathy, respect, and human dignity discreetly adorned the environment. Chloe was invited to speak first. The young woman, who months ago was just a waitress struggling to make ends meet, now stepped onto the small stage with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose. "When I started working here," she said, her voice clear and emotional, "I just wanted a job that paid the bills. I never imagined I would be part of something bigger, that I would have the chance to help transform an entire company." She paused, looking at the familiar faces of the team. "Many of you know me. You know where I come from. You know my struggles. And that is exactly why I can say with absolute certainty, what we do here matters. It's not just about serving expensive food to rich people. It's about creating a space where every human being is treated with the dignity they deserve." The applause was spontaneous and warm. Then, it was Henry's turn. "A few months ago, I put my daughter in a situation no father should," he began. "I asked her to experience humiliation, rejection, and contempt. And although the circumstances were controlled, what she felt was real. The pain was real." Henry looked at Helen, who was sitting in the front row next to her mother, but from that pain, something important was born. A deeper understanding that our success, our wealth, our titles do not make us better than anyone else, and that the true measure of a person is how they treat those who can offer nothing in return. He turned to the newly installed plaque on the main wall of the restaurant. It was a simple but powerful quote. "True hospitality recognizes no class, only humanity." "This will be our new philosophy," Henry said. "Not just pretty words on the wall, but a commitment lived every day, in every interaction, with every person who crosses our door." The ceremony continued with a special dinner, where the entire team sat together. Hierarchies temporarily dissolved. Managers served kitchen assistants, chefs shared stories with hosts, all united by a renewed purpose. John Paul, the first participant in Project New Start, was specially invited to the event. When Henry introduced him to the team, sharing his story of overcoming adversity, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "I was invisible," John said, his voice cracking. "People walked past me on the streets as if I were part of the scenery, not a human being. But here they gave me more than a job. They gave me back my dignity." Helen listened to John's testimony with full attention. After the ceremony, she approached him shyly. "Mr. John, my name is Helen. It was because of you and people like you that my dad did the test." John knelt down to be at the girl's height. "And I thank you, little one, because that test changed my life." The official reopening would happen the next day, but for Henry, that night with his team was the true milestone. There was proof that real change was possible, that redemption was not just an abstract concept, but something tangible that could be built with intention and commitment. The reopening day dawned with a clear sky over the city. Henry arrived at the Golden Palace downtown before sunrise, walking through the silent, reimagined halls. Every detail had been thought out to reflect the new values. The tables near the restrooms, previously considered inferior, now had the same quality and attention as the central tables. The waiting area for delivery drivers had been transformed into a comfortable space, with cushioned chairs and fresh water always available. Chloe arrived shortly after, carrying a folder with the final adjustments to the service protocol. The two sat at one of the tables and reviewed every point, ensuring nothing was forgotten. "Are you nervous?" Henry asked. "Terrified," Chloe admitted with a smile. "What if it doesn't work? What if the customers don't accept the changes?" Henry placed his hand over hers, a paternal gesture. "Then we will have the wrong customers, and it's better to find that out now. But I believe that most people respond well to authenticity, and what we are offering now is genuine." The team began arriving at 8 in the morning. There were familiar faces and some new ones, all having gone through the renewed training program. The energy was different, a mixture of anticipation and commitment that Henry had never felt before in his restaurants. At 11 o'clock, an hour before the official opening, there was a final meeting with the entire team. Henry kept his words brief and direct. Today is not just a reopening, it is a new beginning. For this restaurant, for our company, and for each of us as individuals. Challenges will arise. There will be difficult customers, moments of doubt, situations that will test our values. But always remember, we are building something bigger than ourselves. At noon, the doors opened. The first customers were Mrs. Cecilia Adams, the woman who witnessed the original incident, and her family. Henry greeted her personally. "Mrs. Adams, it is an honor to have you as our first customer in this new phase." The woman smiled warmly. "I wouldn't miss this for anything, Mr. Thompson. I want to see the transformation with my own eyes." She and her family were led to a central table, and Henry discreetly watched as they were served. The server was Brandon, the same host who had initially scorned Helen. Brandon was one of those who asked for a second chance, voluntarily submitting to intensive training and therapeutic counseling to confront his own prejudices. Now, watching him interact with Mrs. Adams and her family, Henry saw a genuinely transformed man. The attention was warm and sincere, not mechanical. Brandon laughed at the woman's comments, offered personalized suggestions, demonstrating the kind of hospitality that came from the heart, not the manual. The restaurant filled up quickly. Reservations had been made weeks in advance, partly out of curiosity about the changes, partly out of genuine support for the new direction. Among the customers were journalists, social influencers, executives, but also ordinary people who had saved up to experience the renewed Golden Palace. Around 3 in the afternoon, something happened that made Henry's heart leap. A middle-aged man entered the restaurant wearing worn work clothes, clearly a blue-collar worker on his lunch break. He hesitated at the entrance, looking around with visible insecurity. Chloe, who was near the reception, saw the man first. She walked up to him with a welcoming smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Golden Palace. Can I help you?" The man seemed surprised by the warm reception. I saw on TV about the changes here. I always wanted to see a fancy restaurant like this, but I never thought I'd be welcome. Today is my birthday, and I thought, why not?" Chloe felt tears sting her eyes, but maintained her smile. "Happy birthday. We have a perfect table for you. And guess what else? The birthday person today gets a special dessert, courtesy of the house." The man, whom Henry later discovered was named Robert, was led to an excellent table with a view of the avenue. No looks of disdain, no malicious comments. Some customers observed with curiosity, but the team treated Robert with the same attention dedicated to any other guest. Henry watched from afar, his heart tight with emotion. That simple moment of an ordinary man being treated with dignity in a space that would have previously rejected him was the validation of everything they had done. During the service, John Paul came out of the kitchen personally carrying Robert's main course. The two men exchanged a few words, and Henry saw Robert look at John with recognition, perhaps seeing in him a story similar to his own. The hours passed at a rapid pace. The service was impeccable, not because of mechanical perfection, but because of the genuineness of the care. There were small errors, yes, a swapped order here, a delay there, but all were handled with grace and humor, with the team demonstrating that true hospitality is not about perfection, but about humanity. At the end of the day, when the last customer left and the doors were closed, the team spontaneously gathered in the main hall. They were exhausted, but there was a palpable energy of accomplishment. Chloe hugged Henry. "We did it. We really did it." "You did it," Henry corrected. "Without your courage that day, none of this would have happened." "No," she disagreed. "Without your willingness to listen, to change, to risk everything you built to do the right thing, none of this would have happened." That night, Henry returned home and found Helen still awake, waiting for him in the living room. "So, Dad, how was it?" Henry sat next to his daughter, pulling her into a hug. It was perfect, my dear. Not because everything went flawlessly, but because every person who walked into that restaurant today was treated as they deserved to be treated, as a valuable human being. Helen smiled. So it was worth it? Everything I went through was worth it? Henry held his daughter's face in his hands. Helen, I am so sorry you had to go through that. But yes, your courage changed not just one restaurant, but hundreds of lives. The employees who now work in a better environment, the vulnerable people who will have opportunities through Project New Start, the customers who will be treated with dignity regardless of who they are. All of this started with your courage. The girl hugged her father tightly. You taught me that dignity is not a privilege, Dad. Now you are showing that to everyone. In the following weeks, the story of the Golden Palace's transformation spread beyond the city. Companies from other sectors began contacting Henry, asking for consultation on how to implement similar cultural changes. Universities invited Chloe to lecture on ethical leadership coming from the grassroots. Project New Start received partnership proposals from social organizations across the country. But perhaps the most significant impact was in the small daily changes happening in every unit of the Golden Palace. A manager who paused to ask how a cleaning staff member's day was going, a host who offered water to a delivery driver waiting under the sun, a chef who patiently mentored a struggling young apprentice. These small actions, multiplied by hundreds of daily interactions, created waves that expanded far beyond the restaurant walls. Customers took that experience with them, treating others with more empathy. Employees applied these lessons in their personal lives. It was a cultural transformation that began with a painful test and evolved into a movement of humanity. 3 months after the reopening, Henry received an unexpected letter. It was from Robert Miller, written from the institution where he awaited his trial. The letter was long, full of regret and reflection. Robert didn't ask for forgiveness, acknowledging he didn't deserve it, but shared how the forced fall had led him to confront demons he had ignored for years. The arrogance, the greed, the emptiness he had tried to fill with power over others. Henry read the letter 3 times. He didn't feel pity for Robert. The consequences were fair and necessary. But he felt something close to hope. Hope that even in the depths of error, redemption was possible for those willing to do the hard work of genuine change. One Sunday morning, 6 months after the test that changed everything, Henry took Helen back to the Golden Palace downtown. There was no special event. It was just a father-daughter lunch. But for both of them, it was significant. They sat at the same table where Helen had been humiliated, where she had received Chloe's saving note, where everything had almost ended terribly. But now, that table didn't carry shame. It carried redemption. Chloe personally came to serve them, not because it was part of her responsibilities, but because she wanted to. The 3 talked about the future, about the next steps for Project New Start, about how to expand the philosophy of true hospitality. When the food arrived, a mushroom risotto prepared with fresh ingredients and genuine love, Helen looked at the plate and then at her father. "I think I can eat risotto without fear now," she said with a smile. Henry laughed, but his eyes were moist. "This risotto is different, Helen. It was made with respect, with care, with the certainty that whoever eats it deserves the best we can offer." Helen tasted the first forkful and smiled. "It's delicious." And it was, not just because of the quality of the ingredients or the chef's skill, but because it carried with it the full meaning of the transformation that had happened there. Every bite was a testament that real change is possible, that human dignity can prevail over prejudice, that the courage of a child and the compassion of a waitress can transform an empire. When they finished the meal, Helen looked around the renewed restaurant, observing the interactions between staff and customers, seeing genuine smiles and mutual respect. "Dad," she said, "I don't think you should feel bad about what happened. You should feel proud of what you did afterward." Henry took his daughter's small hand. "I am proud, my dear, but mostly of you. You taught me that sometimes we need to put ourselves in other people's shoes, literally, to understand what truly matters." Across the room, Robert, the man who had celebrated his birthday there months ago, entered again. He waved to Chloe with familiarity, now a regular customer who brought friends to share the experience. John Paul came out of the kitchen to greet him personally. It was this image, this fusion of people from different backgrounds united by the table and mutual respect, that Henry would carry with him forever. It was living proof that true hospitality recognizes no class, only humanity. And as father and daughter left the restaurant under the soft afternoon sun, Henry knew with absolute certainty that that painful test, those tears shed, that demanding transformation had all been worth it. Because in the end, we don't build legacies with bricks and mortar, but with how we treat people when no one important is looking. And now at the Golden Palace, someone important was always looking. The collective conscience of a team committed to seeing and honoring the humanity in every person. End of story. If the journey of Henry, Helen, and Chloe touched your heart, know that we have many other moving stories waiting for you. Stories about courage, redemption, love, and the incredible human capacity for transformation. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any narrative that can inspire real change in your own life. Hit that like button if this story made you reflect on how you treat the people around you, and in the comments, share. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation? How did you react? Let's build a community together where empathy and respect are more than just pretty words. They are concrete actions. See you in the next story.